Team.
Good evening, Elliot, Eliyahu.
Done
We are live now on our various platforms. If you can mute yourselves, that'd be wonderful. I'm going to share this on just one or two more platforms and we're ready to go.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, around the globe. A second here.
And around your block.
Remember, I lack sleep, so the class is going to be on fire because I'm one of those with the
Are
running
you
on.
aware of the newest Chabad member here in Billings? We have the newest,
Yes, congratulations to Shane, to the Shkadis on the birth of their daughter Shane.
yeah, Mazel
Um,
Tov.
was born on Sunday. The Shkadis have now a second daughter. We send our love from Bozeman all the way down the 90 east of Billings. And if anyone wants to send a gift to the Shkadis, they have a registry as well. We are now going to go live to our class. We are on all our platforms. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are in Parsha Shmini. We are in the third portion of the book of Leviticus. So if you're joining us and using the Chumash that we're using, so you'll open what? The Parsha is on 640, but I'm going to tell you which page we're going to start with today. So we are going to actually start um, on page 656. And so the Parsha, this week's Torah portion, actually, I'm sorry, 654. 654. This week is one of two Torah portions in the entire five books of Moses, the portion of Shmini and the portion of Re'eh in the book of Deuteronomy, that addresses the laws of kosher in a very detailed manner. Kosher birds, kosher domesticated animals, animals that are not kosher, kosher fish, and obviously there's all the laws, the details of kosher, which are the practical way that we celebrate these mitzvahs, is that we need to make sure to actually follow the rules. So if you eat shrimp, stop. If you eat oysters, stop. If you eat clams and crab and octopus and scallop and what's the other one? The other creepy crawly. No, the famous one. Lobster. Strafe, don't eat it. You're eating treif animal, you're eating bacon, don't eat bacon. There's all the practical. You're eating a cheeseburger, don't eat a cheeseburger. But like everything in Yiddishkeit, everything in Judaism, there's the practical expression of the mitzvah, and then there's the layers of mystical and homiletical interpretation that really ingrains within us how to make these mitzvahs part of our psyche, part of our faculty makeup, not just in what we do, but in who we are. So instead of asking, do you keep kosher? Tonight we're going to ask a better question. Are you kosher? Not about what you're consuming, but are you, the human being, are you a kosher human being? And what do the animals teach us, and what do the fish teach us about how we can become more kosher people? So what I share with you tonight is from an incredible handwritten manuscript that the Rebbe wrote on the 19th of Elul, so in the late summer of 1941. The Rebbe came to America with his Rebbetzin, and they survived. They escaped from France, from Berlin to France, and then from France, they went to Vichy, and from Vichy, they went to Marseille, and from Marseille to Nice, and from Nice, they finally boarded a ship that got them across the Surpa Pinto, which was one of the last ships to leave Europe. And the Rebbe arrived in New York on the 28th of Sivan, Chav Ches Sivan, 1941. So we're talking about 2 months after the Rebbe came to America, in Elul, just about 11 days before Rosh Hashanah of Tafshin Beis. So again, August of 1941, the Rebbe is writing a manuscript that we only found in 1994 after the Rebbe passed away. In his door, in the desk of in the drawer of his desk, there was a loose leaf folder, a few of them, with manuscripts that he had written throughout the war in the 30s and then later in the 40s, and they went to print after. And everything I share with you tonight comes from that little manuscript from that summer day of 1941. So on page 654, the verse tells us, it is verse 29, the following are ritually impure for you among creeping creatures that creep on the ground: the weasel, the mouse, the toad family, the hedgehog, the chameleon, the lizard, the snail, and the mole. All these are the ones that are ritually impure for you among all creeping creatures. Anyone who touches them when they are dead will be ritually impure in the evening. So creepy crawlies, it's clear. Don't go eat escargot when you go to France. If you go to France, don't eat things that are listed here, but that have this criteria of being a creepy crawly. But just before that, in verse 27, it says, among all the animals that walk on four legs, any animal that walks on its paws, and then in the parentheses, which is from Rashi, such as a dog, a bear, or a cat, is ritually impure for you. Anyone who touches their carcass will ritually impure until evening. One who carries their carcass should immerse his garments, and he will be ritually impure until evening. They are ritually impure for you. So if you have an animal that does not have hooves, right, we always talk about split hooves, but then there's animals that are not kosher, like a horse, but at least it has hooves. What about an animal that doesn't have hooves? It walks on four, meaning it walks on its paws. So in verse 27, it tells us that those animals are, if you touch them when they're dead, their carcass, you become impure. If you carry it, your clothing becomes impure. But the bottom line is, he gives three examples of that. Rashi gives us three examples: a cat, a dog, and a bear. That's just basic verse. But like I said, kosher is not just about what you eat, it's also about who you are. So the Rebbe in this manuscript asks, why those three examples? If you want to go through the whole animal kingdom, there's more than just those three animals that walk on their paws. So why did you pick those three specifically? Is there something that we can internalize in how we are to interact with the world that will make us a more refined person, a better human being, by learning what not to be from the dog, the bear, and the cat? And it's interesting because, I don't want to offend anyone, although I may. It's not me. I understand that in Montana, especially in Bozeman, we're very obsessed with dogs. It's a religion. I understand that there's cat ladies and cat men, whatever you want to, people that live with kittens. And generally you come to their house and there's like six of them staring at you from the window and freaking you out when you're trying to deliver a box of matzah and giving you googly eyes. Mm-hmm. And then you have, obviously, we have grizzlies and black bears in Montana. So bears are something very real to us here in Montana. And the question is, what do these three reflect when it comes to our spiritual service? Well, the Rebbe writes there as follows. The goal of an animal having a hoof, whether cloven or non-cloven, the fact that it has a hoof is to separate their feet from the ground, which from a spiritual perspective, what that means is it's supposed to minimize or withhold the negative influence, the dirty influence of the mud, right? The dirty influence of worldly matters. Even an animal has standards, and spiritually what it means is that there's a separation between their paws, between their legs, and the ground through the hooves, and the hooves is to make sure the world doesn't impact them as much, right? That's why if you have hooves, you can do things that animals that don't have hooves can't. It allows you to give, first of all, give you a kick that you'll remember in Tatn's Tatnadai, and it'll knock you out of the park. But also you can climb on rocks. I mean, you can do things with those hooves that are incredible, especially if they're treated well. So for a person, for each of us, the hooves represent our responsibility to separate between, to create a separation between us and the world, not to run away from the world because you're still walking on the earth, but you have a separation so that you're not totally influenced and totally immersed in worldly, physical, materialistic matters. Now, there's three ways the world can impact you negatively, and that's why you need to have those hooves. And that's why you need to watch out from being anywhere near, not physically, but metaphorically, anywhere near a dog, cat, or a black bear and grizzly. Why? Because the influence that the world can have on you manifests itself in three different ways. Ask yourself, what kind of influence can the world have on me that's negative? So the first thing it can affect you is intellectually. It warps your brain. The world gets you to think in a way that's very unholy, very unproductive. In other words, it can have a very negative effect on your intellect. And when you look at a cat, they do not represent, and what I'm going to say is from the Torah. I don't care what your interaction is. I shouldn't say I don't care. It's not relevant what your interaction is with your particular pet. What I'm sharing with you is straight from the Talmud. A cat is amazing when it comes to being having refined character traits. That's why it says that if the Torah wasn't given, or let's say God wouldn't give us the Torah at Sinai, we would learn the laws of modesty from cats. When cats go to the restroom, when a kitten goes to the restroom, it's very modestly. Unlike a dog, there's pished in the ganze Stadt, the whole city has to see them urinating. A cat does it more modestly. So when it comes to character traits, a cat is more refined than a dog. When it comes to intellect, the Talmud says about a cat, and I'm quoting, the Talmud says in the Tractate of Horius, it says, a cat doesn't recognize its master, meaning it forgets its master. If a cat walks away from its house and finds another cozy couch in someone else's house, they're perfectly fine moving on. They'll move into the next house. They're good with that. A dog, on the other hand, the Talmud says, knows its master. He will come back to his master. He'll walk 6 days to go back to its master. So a cat represents someone who intellectually is struggling. They don't even know who their master is. And spiritually, that means a Jew who doesn't even know who God is. He doesn't know who his master is. He can forget about his master, even though in character refinement, they may be in a much better shape than others. So it's important that when we are trying to distance ourselves from the world influencing us negatively, to remember not to turn into a cat. Don't turn into the person, no matter how refined you are, don't turn into the person who forgets his master, who intellectually has no room, no recognition of their master of God. But then we don't want you to become a dog either. And what does it say about a dog? A dog is the opposite of the cat. The dog is all heart, but also negatively, emotionally, their character traits, they're vicious. Yeah, they love their master, but don't trigger a dog. What's a kid? A kitten will scratch you. A dog will give you rabies and send you packing. You'll be missing a chunk of your leg, right? Or they'll maul a kid. Dogs are azay funnin. They're in your face. If you have a dog like I do, you know that the poor UPS driver has to be greeted every day with the same attack, right? They don't hurt anyone because they're trained, but in their character refinement, they're not so refined. But when it comes to intellectual recognition, they know who their master is. And this reflects a Jew who may not be the most refined person, and that's why we want to make sure they don't turn into a dog, so they don't lack their proper character refinement. But at least this person has a recognition of their master of God. But then you have the bear, the grizzly, and the black bear. And that represents someone who, not their intellect and not their emotion, which is the cat and the dog, their actions are very, very grub. You know what grub means? Very coarse. Very, there's no word for grub. Just coarse. The Gemara says in the Tractate of Avodah Zarah on page 2b, in Avodah Zarah it says, Yosef taught, this is a reference to the Persians. Listen to this quote. Who eat and drink like a bear, are thickly coated with flesh like a bear, grow their hair like a bear, and like a bear are never at rest. They're always on the go, right? They're pacing back and forth. Don't ask me why the Talmud. I don't know what was going on with the Persians back 1,800 years ago. Maybe, you know, most Iranians I know are not obese, but evidently from the Talmud back then, Persians, everything about them, their behavior was all about fressing and eating and overeating and becoming fat, obese from it, and growing their hair like, huh? And the Greeks were very into having thin bodies. That's why they started the Olympics. They worshipped the bodies. Quite the contrary. This was the opposite of the Greeks. This were the people who they enjoyed a lot of cookies and a lot of flesh, and they grew their hair like and they didn't have rest. They were unhealthy, big animals. And the Torah is teaching in this manuscript, the Rebbe is telling you that when you're a Jew who's trying to be kosher, you need to refrain from being that. You can't be so indulged. You can't indulge so much in physicality, materialism that you forget who you are. Everyone has their vices. You know how sometimes when you look at someone and they're doing something that's making you crazy, how come no one's saying anything? This person's eating like a chazer. And then you realize that the reason you're so disgusted by it is because it reminds you of what you do when you're eating like a chazer. And what the Torah is telling us here, what Chassidus is teaching us here, is that you shouldn't be like a cat, which means you lack the recognition and the intellectual ability to recognize your master. You should not be like a dog where you have recognition of your master, but you lack character refinement. And you certainly need to be careful with your actions, that you don't turn into a black bear or a grizzly, where it's all about food, more food, and then you're just a restless beast that doesn't have the hooves to separate for you from your legs, from your paws touching the ground. That's all. Everything I just shared is an introduction to what? To the second half of what the Rebbe discusses in that manuscript, which is not about animals, four-legged animals, but it's about fish. Because in our Torah portion, it also addresses fish. And if you look at your Chumash, you go back to your Chumash, we're using the live Chumash that we use every week, on page 652. Oh, so it's just one page back. It says, 653, verse 9. Among all creatures that are in the water, you may eat these. You may eat any of those creatures in the water that have fins and scales, whether they live in the seas or in the rivers. But any that do not have fins or scales among all the creeping creatures in the water and among all living creatures in the water, whether in the seas or the rivers, are an abomination for you. So like I mentioned earlier, there's, what did you say? Abomination. So there is when we talk about fish, a lot of the common fish are problematic. A lot of the fish that you get when you go to a sushi place, and everyone says, "Oh, just a sushi place. I'm going to order a salmon." You can't have salmon with oyster sauce and with scallops and with shrimp, God forbid, and all the other chazarai that's there. So now, just for those that don't keep track, and I don't expect you to keep track because this is it's not stuff you learn even in college. Forget about yeshiva. There are 4 types of scales on fish, and only 2 of them make it kosher, and I'll explain why. The 4 types are called clinoid, cycloid, ganoid, and placoid. There's 4 types of scale, whatever the scientific terms are. Only the clinoid and cycloid scales are valid because the Torah tells us that it needs to be scales that you can remove with your nail. Right? They're not stuck to the skin of the fish. If you have to remove the skin in order for the scales to be removed, it's not a kosher fish. And that's where a lot of people make the mistake with like sturgeon and eel. Oh, it's kosher, it has scales. It has to be the kosher scales that are removable, otherwise it's not kosher. So the Torah says you need fins and scales. But there's a very, very powerful Mishnah in the Talmud tractate of Nida, and I'm quoting straight from the Talmud. Kol sheyesh lekaskeses yesh lesnapir. Any fish that has scales certainly has fins. You're not going to find a fish that has scales that doesn't have fins. The yesh yesh lesnapir, however, there are fish that have fins but don't have scales. In other words, the real sign of a kosher fish, no, the real sign of a kosher fish is the scales, not the fins. Because any fish that has scales is going to have fins. So later the Gemara asks, how come if you don't really need why do you need both? And the Gemara says, La'agil Torah Ladira, that expands the Torah and amplifies. In other words, by mentioning both, it gives you the opportunity to learn a bunch of different laws about fish and about kashrus, about kosher, from the fact that it says fins and scales. But practically, the actual sign that you know it's a kosher fish is not the fins, it's the scales, because automatically that means if it has kosher scales, it has fins. Very powerful, very basic statement. So yes, you can buy tuna, and you can buy salmon, and you can buy herring and whitefish, and you could buy, what's the one we get over here? The trout and cod and tilapia and halibut and sea bass and a lot of amazing fishes, flounder, a lot of amazing fishes kosher, but catfish? No, very much not. Catfish is not kosher.
Because it's a bottom dollar.
Because it doesn't have
scales.
There you go. Doesn't have this. Doesn't have. Thank you, Elio. So
it's also a bottom dweller.
Right. So, but bottom dweller, the bottom feeder, and bottom dweller, those are terms that we use for practical application to know, because generally those are the ones that aren't kosher. But the actual sign that it's not kosher is the fact that it doesn't have scales. And by the way, any kosher website, whether it's Chabad.org or kosher or the OU.org, the Orthodox Union, there's many websites that can give you a list of 200 fish, and you'll know which one. And there's a lot that are kosher. You have to be very, very careful with the ones that are, and there's plenty of that too. Especially if you're eating out. When a Jew tells you, "I'm eating out in a restaurant, but I'm only having fish," it's obviously better than eating treif meat, but they need to make sure that no one's pouring onto that fish something that could be totally treif, straight out of a non-kosher fish. Now, in this same manuscript, 1941, the Rebbe talks about fins and scales, and again, how does it make you kosher, not the fish? How do you implement and internalize these ideas of fins and scales in your life to be a healthier, more productive, more holy, more learned, more spiritual Jewish person? So the Rebbe says like this: fish is always the representative, biblically, rabbinically, fish is always the sign of something, right? Because fish cannot live out of water. That is part of who they are. And it's always been an example of the Torah scholars of Jews that we cannot survive without the study of Torah. Famous analogy in the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, who when the Romans were coming for him, they said, how could you break the law of the Roman emperor? And he's like, you don't understand. For us Jews, right? Water is our Torah, which is the water is our life. You're asking me to die? So kill me. We cannot live without Torah. But there, our life and the length of our days, our life is intertwined and connected at its core with Torah. And to tell a Jew to disconnect from their faith, from their Judaism, is like telling a fish to go out of water because it's going to be better for them out of water. Every movement that's opened up in Judaism or in the name of Judaism that tells people that they can survive without the authentic traditional Torah is no different than telling a fish, come with me, come live on the land. You don't need to have your water. It will last for a few minutes before the fish starts going flapping and flapping until all of a sudden you make a funeral and you can bury them or eat them.
Give it to Mick.
Give it to Mick. He's watching. So a fish without water is impossible, and a Jew without Torah is impossible. Rabbi Akiva said that famous analogy about the fox who told the fish, come with me. Come with me on earth. I'll take care of you. Come in my net. And the fish said to him, he said, no, he said, and they call you the smartest animal, the fox, that you were going to tell a fish to come out of water. What's wrong with you? And that was his analogy for the Romans trying to tell him to come away from Torah. So, if fish in water is the sages and Jews in Torah, in order for a fish to be kosher, you need to learn Torah in the proper way. So it's not enough to be in the water. You need to be kosher. You have to be in the water because you're a fish, but you also have to have fins and scales. And you need both, because the Torah says both. Even though the sign is the scales, but it mentions both. What are the two? So the scales represent protection of the fish. Their job is to protect the internal organs, the layers beneath it from decay, from outside attacks. And what that means for a Jew studying Torah, the scales represent the protection that they need to create for themselves, the buffer that they need to create for themselves to protect their Torah study. And that, in other words, that they should really get to the truth and not get caught up in any misunderstandings or misinterpretations, right? Because you can take Torah and use it for the wrong things all the time. Take one half a line or totally misunderstand it. So in order to get to the truth and understand it properly, you need to have scales, protection. What's the protection? Fear of God, fear of heaven. If you study Torah and you don't fear God, meaning you're not in awe of your creator, you're not studying it as a godly wisdom, you're studying it like you're studying Shakespeare, it's not going to survive. You'll study Torah and you'll end up misinterpreting it, distorting it, destroying it, going on the radio and telling people things in the name of Judaism which have nothing to do with Judaism. It's your boichvetik, it's your own stomachache that you came up with. It's a bellyache, and you go share your bellyache with people and you say, I speak in the name of Judaism. If you don't have Yirat Shamayim, if you don't have the fear of heaven, if you don't have the protection, the scales that make sure that you're seeking truth, the truth of Torah, without any influence from the outside, with any agendas, just Torah, you'll fail. You need to have the protection of the scales. And once you have the protection of the scales, every fish that has scales has fins. What are the fins? Fins propel you forward. The fins can take you forward. That's what they do. They allow the fish to swim. And the fins represent the ability of a Jew while studying Torah to come up with their own novel chidushim, their own novel ideas in the study of Torah. To learn so deep and so layered to the point that you can come up with your own ideas in Torah, where you connect ideas and you get deeper and layers of understanding and connect other thoughts that you learned elsewhere. You can come up with your own novel ideas, your own chidushim in Torah, whether it's in the Talmud or the Mishnah or the Chumash, whatever you're studying, because you had the protection to make sure you don't sway, you don't allow yourself to go away from the truth. We are truth seekers. Someone asked me on Monday, it was our 18th wedding anniversary, and someone asked me, Chavi, tell us something you like about each other and something you really don't like about each other. It was a great question. So I said, it was a live interview, and I said, the thing I love about Chavi is also the thing I can't stand, which is what? I said her authenticity. I love the fact that she never buys into anything superficial. She can't stand it. She's to the core authentic, but that could also make you crazy because she can never get away with anything superficial. So the thing I love about her is also the thing I can't stand, right? When you're studying Torah, you must, by the way, just for clarity, she said the same thing, that there's one thing she likes, the thing she loves most about me is what she also can't stand, which is my energy and passion to do more and more. So it's a wonderful trait to have, to never stop going, but it's also, you never take a break, you can't stop. So it's also the downside. But the point is that we have to be authentic people, and to be authentic, to have authentic conversations, that our study of Torah needs to be authentic, seeking truth. And the only way to guarantee that is to have the protection of Yirat Shamayim, that I'm not doing this with my own agenda, my own stuff. I am doing this with purity of heart to seek the truth, and I'm protected by the fact that I'm living a life that's God-fearing. You can't tell me you represent Torah and 5 seconds later do something deliberately breaking a biblical law. I'm sorry, you're not a representative of Judaism. So you need the scales. Once you have the scales, the sky is the limit to how much you could do to innovate and bring novel interpretation and lessons from the Torah, because you're sticking to the core. And it's so, so important to stick to the core. So to be a kosher fish, of course, you have to be in water. Every fish has to be in water, which means you have to be immersed in the sustenance of life, which is Torah. But even how you're immersed in Torah, you need to have two important kosher signs. Number one, the scales that protect you. Number two, that will lead to having fins that will be able to propel you into great understanding of Torah study without getting caught up in any of the misunderstandings of Torah. So it's a fascinating thing that in this little 2-page, I don't even know, a page and a half manuscript from 1941, the Rebbe addresses the cat, the dog, and the grizzlies and black bears, but he also addresses the fish. And an incredible reminder, and I do think it's a very important thing, because just like you don't want to meet someone, you don't want Jews walking around saying, when Torah talks about kosher, it's only a spiritual thing for how I am. It's not about what I eat, it's about who I am. No. The Torah is telling you how to eat and how to drink. So you don't want Jews on one side saying, I don't need to do the practical kosher laws, just the spiritual aspects of what it means to be kosher. On the other hand, you don't want Jews who only eat kosher and drink kosher but aren't kosher themselves. They're not taking the lessons of the laws of kosher and internalizing them. I went in to buy a gift for someone today who was very kind to the Chabad house, and their husband told me they like this store on the corner of Tracy and Bozeman called Wisdom Collective or Collective Wisdom. You go down in a basement. And I came in there and I thought I was going to pass away. There was 62 Buddhas staring at me. And it's not nice. They shouldn't be staring at me. It's not. I was always told by my mother, you shouldn't stare at people. I walked in, they were all looking at me. I stared them right back down. Then they had these musical boxes, then they have a dish that you make sounds.
Oh yeah, singing bowls.
Singing bowls. Then they had dragons staring at the place was, if I was a kid, I'd probably think it's a haunted house, right? And you think about that, there's a massage room. I got all this Buddhist, Hindu meditation. Wonderful. Leave me out of it. I got what I needed, which was a gift card. But my point is, some Jews think that instead of following the 613 commandments of the Torah, if I close my eyes and I do some Zen meditation and I think about how I am going to be kosher instead of how I'm going to consume kosher, it's enough. It's not. You have to actually practice the laws of kosher. Don't eat the cheeseburger. Don't eat the cheese and meat lasagna. Don't put pepperoni on your pizza. Don't eat oysters and lobsters and all the creepy, crawly things that come out of it. When I was in Israel in yeshiva, the dormitory in Lud, we used to smell when the people from Thailand started moving to Israel for work, they eat cats. So outside the dorm of the yeshiva, they made barbecues every day. They were barbecuing cats outside the dorm, and I had to smell that all day. The Torah says practically, you can't do that. But then there's the other side of it. And I come from the other side. I come from the Orthodox world, where you may keep kosher to the very last, and that's important. Make sure there's no bugs in your lettuce because you're not allowed to eat bugs, and make sure you have proper dishes, and make sure you're waiting the proper time between milk and meat. But don't allow that to be enough for you. You also have to make sure you are kosher. Are you living with the proper character traits? Are you living by recognizing your master? Are you living not with indulgence into physicality and materialism? Are you studying Torah like your life depends on it because it does? Are you protecting yourself with God-fearing behavior? Are you propelling yourself to innovate, to learn Torah enough that you can actually come up with novel ideas in Torah, which, by the way, you do sometimes while we're learning, because when you learn, that's what happens. That's what the Torah is teaching us. You need both. Practical kosher, and then ask yourself every day, am I going to live a kosher life? Am I going to be a kosher human being? Because that changes everything. We're not only working on what we consume, we're working on who we are going to be. And that's our message for tonight. Keep kosher, but also be kosher. Thou shalt be kosher. Thou shalt be pure. And the more you do it, the more you're going to want to do it. So this morning when I was flying and they asked me if I want a meal, I said, I'd love a meal, but I'm guessing you don't have a kosher meal. They said, oh, I'm so sorry, which they always say the same thing. That's fine. That's called keeping kosher. What about being kosher? Sometimes it's a lot harder. And that's the message for tonight. 1941, the Rebbe was writing little notes so that in 2024, we can be sitting here and internalizing this idea of being a kosher individual and living our lives in accordance with the spiritual components of kosher, which make us and the world around us a much better place. Have a wonderful night, a freiliche night. Have a wonderful week. This week, come to shul. It's going to be 2 Torahs. It's going to be Parsha Shmini and Parsha HaChodesh. We're getting ready for Pesach. 2.5 weeks to the Seder, baby. That's it. So buckle up, get ready, and we'll see you guys soon. Sei gesund.